what have you done, or what will you do for young professionals to believe that there'll be a role they can play in your administration if you're elected?
My administration will look like Chicago at all levels, in my cabinet, in the department heads, in the appointments that I will make to the sister agencies that the mayor virtually controls. Chicago Public Schools, until we move to an elected school board, that I will be one of my priorities. And if Springfield doesn't legislate that, I'm willing to go into the federal court to ensure that will be one. But I will also appoint Chicagoans, representative of the entire city, to the Chicago Park District Board, to the City Colleges Board, to the Chicago Park District Board. Chicago can only move forward as one city when we embrace all of its people, all of its communities, and ensure that everyone is an active stakeholder with an outcome that they want to see and an outcome that they have a voice and a vote in shaping. My administration will find the best talent of Chicagoans, and of course that cuts across age. We will not be hampered by ageism in an administration. As I've sat with young people over the past 5 months, they have raised my awareness about the exclusion of young people that will also occur on commissions, on boards, on task forces that will be created to address particular issues that need addressing as we move forward in the formulation of policies and procedures of how to run a government that is inclusive.
Commissioner, as you mentioned young people, we have a young person on our panel, Charles Preston, who is a student here at CSU. What's on the minds of young people, students, what are they thinking about, Charles, when it comes to this election? I know many of them are going to vote in this election, some for the first time for a mayor.
I can't speak for all schools.
Of course not.
I'll say what's on my mind. I want a mayor that reflects what we are thinking. I want a mayor that reflects that's willing to work in our communities, that's willing to work with our communities.
What's the question, though? We're not going to give speeches, guys. We're going to ask questions.
Unemployment for African Americans in Chicago is 25%, and that's the highest of all racial groups in the city. What would you do to encourage job creation and job readiness in predominantly African American neighborhoods that have the highest unemployment?
In the first place, I would be cognizant that when decisions are made, that they do not have a disproportionate impact on African Americans. Over the past 8 years, when there have been layoffs at City Hall, in the Chicago public school system, the brunt of the layoffs have impacted communities in the south side of Chicago and the west side of Chicago. The school closures exacerbated this reality. This only contributes to creating the conditions and fostering and perpetuating the conditions of inequality and the concentration of poverty in the areas that have the highest levels of poverty. Youth unemployment in the African American community is estimated to be just over 90%. That is intolerable and unacceptable. It contributes significantly to much of the violence that we see play out in Chicago.
But Commissioner, let me ask you a really, really tough question. A lot of us, when we travel through our community, we can be Chatham, we can be in Inglewood, we can be in Roseland, and we see those city street crews working, repairing streets in our communities and sewers and curbs. And we look at those people, we say, man, how did the whole crew get to be Latino? How will you, as the city's first Latino mayor, deal with that phenomenon, that problem that we had?
First mayor who happens to be Latino, Charles. public servant, and it began very early, has been rooted in the belief in fairness and equity, including a commitment to racial equity. It recognizes historical barriers that have been created and that have kept people from enjoying equal opportunity. My values are such that I recognize that we as a society cannot move forward, cannot advance until there is equal opportunity. At different points in time, it's required removing those barriers. I have been the beneficiary of legislation, federal legislation, civil rights legislation, for example, that enabled me to get elected in 1965 because of the courageous men and women who engaged in the March on Selma. It gave us the Voting Rights Act. In 1986, because of the Voting Rights Act and our fight in federal court to overturn a discriminatory ward map in the city of Chicago, I became elected to the city council, and I held Harold Washington by the same token.
I hear you on all that. But I mean, in terms of these work groups,
yes.
I mean, as mayor, would you have to say, perhaps to a subcontractor, hey, you're going to have to lay off some Latinos and hire some blacks? Would you be willing to do that?
I am committed to fairness and equity, and that means the numbers tell the story of whether we're succeeding or not. I will have an administration that not only talks the talk, but walks the talk.
Parity.
Yes, and I will ensure that from the top down, not just in streets and sanitation or the other infrastructure departments, in every department at the city of Chicago, that as we hire, we seek to ensure that every department looks like the city of Chicago and its people.
Dr. Kim Delaney, who is a professor of African American Studies here.
Mr. Garcia, this is a big problem in Chicago, big concern. Do you still believe you should add 1,000 new police officers? If so, how would you pay for them? Where would you put them? What new processes or training might you implement to try to prevent more of the same contentious relationships that currently exist between Chicago police officers and minority communities?
Excellent question, Dr. The city of Chicago, over the past 4 years, has suffered 10,000 shootings, heading up now toward 11,000 shootings, almost 2,000 homicides. Many of those homicides, of course, remain unsolved, and you read the stories yesterday in the Chicago dailies that the police department doesn't have enough detectives to investigate homicides. That's only a part of the story. In order to reduce the number of shootings in Chicago, the most important violence reducer, preventer, homicide preventer are jobs. Good paying jobs for everyone in the city of Chicago, number one. There are other things that we can do, such as train and expose more people to the practice of restorative justice. We have some restorative justice practitioners in this community. Do I think we still need 1,000 additional police officers, men and women? I do. I think that unless, I respect your view, I believe that unless we're able to train more police men and women who look like the people in Chicago neighborhoods where the violence exists, to engage in establishing relationships of trust, mutual respect, and accountability, the violence in our communities in the short term will not abate. As we continue to fight for looking for as many resources as possible in job creation, in positive alternatives for youth, to reduce the 92% unemployment rate, especially among African American males in those communities. Unless we address those things, then the police by themselves can't do it. But a part of it has to be establishing, once again, relationships of trust, mutual respect, and accountability. I am convinced of that. As someone who has been a practitioner of reducing violence in my own community, in other communities, banded together to advance public policies that provide positive alternatives while seeking to reduce incarceration rates, especially of people of color in Illinois and in Chicago.
Commissioner, but I have to follow up, and I know that you've said that your fiscal plan is a work in progress, something that you're going to develop after you are inaugurated. But I got to ask this question now: how are you going to pay for 1,000 new police officers? Because I think our audience pay taxes. They want to know how you're going to do that.
Certainly, and they should. And they should. Well, first of all, we begin with taking half of the $100 million that we're presently spending on overtime for police in Chicago. You begin hiring those officers, training them in community policing, in engaging people in the community, residents, organizations, churches, etc., while you ensure that we find the rest of the money. We're not going to hire 1,000 police officers, in June of next year. The process will be a lengthy one. There will be a series of cohorts that occur over that time. What are some of the potential revenue sources? Expanding, modernizing the sales tax is one way to do it. Ensuring that it doesn't have regressive impacts on low-income people.
That sounds like a Rahm Emanuel.
No, mine protects against regressive impact on neighborhoods and low-income people in Chicago, low-income earners.
But you want to expand the sales tax?
Certain categories of sales.
Like services?
Yes, and for higher-end users in particular.
That's what the mayor as part of his program.
He hasn't defined it. He has said just expand it in general. I want to protect against things that are consumed in neighborhoods like dry cleaning and nails and taking your dog to the veterinarian, things like that.
I think you're making some news here, though, because you're saying now that you're signing on to his.
No, I'm not signing on to his. The sales tax has been around for a long time.
Generally,
I'm saying that that's one potential source. A luxury tax on luxury goods is another. There are additional savings to be had. For example, the paper last week reported the Inspector General has said that we can save over $6.6 billion in streets and sanitation if we simply begin to collecting fees that private users are getting for free at the present time. Many other savings of that nature.
I'm going to have to throw it out there to my colleague Robin Robinson. She has index cards that she's been working with the audience to get you to ask your questions on a card. Robin, maybe you can explain the deal here. What we doing? There you go. Works better than mine.
It's only fair that you've been seeing some of the tweets going by. The hashtag, by the way, wow, I'm getting very godlike here. My audio sounds really good. Hashtag CSU votes. You guys are probably seeing it on the screen, but those of you at home who are listening on WBON, hashtag CSU votes. So I'm going to start right here with my very first honor student. What is your name? Hannah. Okay, Hannah, you're a student at Chicago State studying what? Psychology. I don't think she expected me to ask her that question. She looks so surprised. All right, the best question out of all these tweets that you've seen. Give me your best question for Commissioner Garcia.
What do you plan to do about the gang/gun violence?
Oh, that's a good one for a quick answer, right? Did you hear that? What do you plan to do about the gang/gun violence?
One, when I'm elected mayor, within the first 90 days, I will convene a public safety summit involving people and stakeholders in neighborhoods throughout the city of Chicago. Why is that important? It cannot simply be the police. It cannot be the usual